Some level of innovation is needed for any business to stay competitive. To talk about how businesses can strive to do better, Gail invites innovation expert Jeff Standridge to the podcast. Stay tuned for insights and discussion about what drives innovation, how to apply it to your business, and how to identify the areas that will be most impacted by that innovation. Apply now for Business Breakthrough Live. Join us in Denver on November 10th and 11th for actionable training that will help you grow your business. Visit thepearlcollective.com/BBL to learn more about this business-changing experience.
Well, welcome to the Creative Genius podcast. And we have today our guest, Jeff Standridge, and he is from Arkansas. And we were just sharing with each other before we started the recording today that I also lived in Arkansas for about 10 years of my life. So I'm glad to meet with another Arkansan.
There you go. That's great. How are you doing, Gail? It's good to be here today.
It's my pleasure to have you. So why don't you share a little bit about your background with us?
Sure. Well, I grew up in a very rural part of Arkansas, down in Pike County. It's a very small county. The town was about 1,200 people, had 28 people in my graduating class in the public school, the local public school. It was not a one-room school, but it was a one-campus school. So first grade through 12th grade were all on the same campus. Came to the University of Central Arkansas in Conway, Arkansas in the mid-'80s. And after cramming a 4-year degree into almost 6 years, I actually got into the healthcare world, spent about 10 years as a paramedic respiratory therapist on the helicopter team at Children's Hospital, as a professor at the University of Arkansas for medical sciences. And I knew academically I didn't want to get another clinical graduate degree. So I got a degree in organizational behavior, and that led me into the business world. I spent about 20 years with a company called Maxim Corporation, which was a publicly traded data analytics company. Worked all over the world, ran global operations, acquired multiple companies on 5 continents. And then about 8 years ago, I left to focus on growing entrepreneurs in the state of Arkansas. And that's where I spend some of my time today, and created a venture fund to also invest in some of those entrepreneurs. And then do some billable consulting with larger companies around the world as well. So that's kind of my story. I'm a granddad of 2, and a granddad of 2, and a dad of 2 daughters. And so all I can do is raise girls. So I'm a girl dad, girl granddad.
Well, that's good, because we have about 80% of the people on this podcast that are listening are females. So you're speaking to the right people.
Awesome.
Well, I want to start with one of the questions that I thought would be very interesting, which is, what is the biggest challenge that you've overcome, and how did that drive you to what you're doing now?
I may have 2 for you, right?
Oh, okay.
So
I'll take 2.
I mentioned in my intro that I crammed a 4-year degree into 6 years. I had the academic underpinnings from my days at a very small rural school, but it took me 3 or 4 years to actually become a good student, to develop the academic skills. So I had the foundation, but I didn't have the skills. So first course I ever took was an intro to finance and economics, thinking I was going to be a finance major because I had an interest in finance, and I made the only D I've ever made in my life. Went to college on a music scholarship because I was an all-state instrument player, all-state musician in one instrument, the baritone or the euphonium, a brass instrument. And when I decided I couldn't major in finance, I thought I would major in music. And I did that until I learned, and everyone at the university learned, that I wasn't particularly talented. I just worked hard. And then after I graduated high school, after I graduated college, I purchased the business that I had worked at all through junior high and high school, which was a gas station muffler shop where I learned to change the oil, service the vehicles, fix flats, weld mufflers on. I bought that business and hired someone to run it for me while I was working on the helicopter team at Arkansas Children's Hospital. And I lost that business after a couple of years and had to dig out from under the the stigma of that, but also the debt that was associated with it, because I couldn't, once I liquidated everything, I didn't have enough money to pay off all of the debt that had been incurred in that business. So I spent the next 8 or 10 years doing that. So those 2 or 3 different stories, led me to this concept that being gritty, being resilient, that failure's only failure if you quit. Probably the greatest realization I've come out with in that regard. Went on to get a master's and a doctorate, and literally work around the world on 5 continents doing business. And I now teach entrepreneurial finance in that same university, where the only course I ever took there in business, I received a D in.
I love that, because I think sometimes you have to have those failures. I have plenty of them. I can tell you multiple ones, but I think that really gives you that grit. And ironically, the name of our company is Pearl Collective, and pearls are made from sand or grit. And so it really is appropriate to the name of our company to what you have to go through as an entrepreneur, in my view.
Don't you think it's interesting that 2 precious stones, so to speak, in the terms of diamonds and pearls, are created with grit and pressure and resistance and heat and what have you?
It teaches us a lot about what it really takes to be successful in all aspects of life.
Agreed.
So let's talk a little bit about innovation, because that is one of your areas of focus. I noticed that on your website. So what exactly is innovation as it applies to business?
Well, innovation, and I have a definition that I like to use, and there are parts of that definition I think that are important. First of all, it is planned change. It's planned or orchestrated change that's directed at better ways. Better can be more effective, more efficient, more profitable, easier, but better ways at doing things than we're currently doing them today or have done them in the past. So planned change that drives better ways of doing things. There are 3 different types of innovations that we see kind of on a day-to-day basis. One of those is we're probably all most familiar with, which is incremental innovation, which sometimes gets described as process improvement or continuous improvement. It's making those incremental changes that, if we make incremental improvements over a period of time, could result in massive outcome differences, but it's incremental nonetheless. There's breakthrough innovation, that is where we take an existing business model and we apply new technology to it, right? So Uber, taxis have been around for a long time, but we applied a new technology to it to make it better. Or we take an existing technology and we apply a new business model to it. The Dollar Shave Club, for instance, right? So we take razors and sharpeners and facial lotions and what have you, and we put it in a new business model called a subscription box, and we send you those things on a monthly basis. So those are breakthrough innovations. And then there's disruptive innovation, where something actually gets displaced, something gets replaced. YouTube, Hulu, Roku, and all of the streaming that's happening that's replacing cable TV is an example of disruptive innovations, where someone or something gets disrupted.
And there are so many examples right now. It's just mind-blowing how many things, how many industries are being affected by it.
And they're happening exponentially, right? So you think about AI that's come online. I've heard people lamenting AI is going to take over our jobs. And my response is, no, AI is not going to take your job. People who know how to leverage AI, they're going to take your job.
Exactly. I use AI literally every day.
Every day.
I think we all do, and we don't necessarily know we're using it. Even if you have Alexa, you've got AI. So
sure.
Yeah, it's there, and we use it without being aware.
I'm surprised she's not answering you back here. So,
maybe she is. Maybe she decided to be quiet since we're on the podcast. All right. Well, most of our listeners, or I would probably say all of them, are creative entrepreneurs. And they're essentially innovators in design. So how can designers apply innovation to their businesses?
So it's interesting. One of the pervasive thoughts in innovation, and maybe one of the best models, pervasive models in innovation, is a model that originated with creative designers called design thinking. I actually went to an executive course at MIT, a postgraduate course that was focused on design thinking for entrepreneurs and innovators. And so it is a process that is steeped in what's called empathetic design, which is really deeply understanding the needs of the customer for that, or the stakeholders for that particular innovation, and designing it from the outset such that it serves to meet those needs precisely and specifically for those target customers. So I think the creative design world has already contributed a significant amount to the world of innovation just through the model design thinking. And I use that in all of our innovation sprints and all of our consulting engagements. I'm constantly referring to the design thinking, or what's sometimes called human-centered design, that originated with creative design types.
Interesting. Well, what do you think the future holds for entrepreneurs? You mentioned AI, so of course that's going to be very, very big for us in the future, but what else?
Well, it's interesting that I think entrepreneurship is only going to proliferate in the coming years. The fact of the matter is, already today, 50% of the world's employees are employed by small, medium businesses, startups and small businesses. 99% of all employers are startups and small businesses. They already account for about 65% of all new job creation, but about 85% of all net new job creation. And I only see that increasing over time. The vast majority of business owners today, over 50% of business owners today are 55 years of age and older, and 10,000 of them are retiring every day, 10,000 of them are retiring every day. And so there's going to be a massive transition of businesses from first generation owners to second and third generation owners over the course of the next decade or so. And then so that's just the macroeconomic landscape of entrepreneurship. Then you begin to think about the surgence of technologies that are transforming the way work gets done, where work gets done. I think the sky's the limit, quite frankly.
Yeah, it's really interesting because when we started this business, it's been 16 and a half years. And at year 15 and a half, we went completely remote. So it was really interesting because people thought it was very odd that we did what we did at that early stage. And I think that for me, I think innovation is just part of my DNA. And I think it's really essential for our clients and the people listening to be thinking about how can you take something and disrupt it? How can you look at things differently? How can you just put a different twist on things? Because that's what's going to keep you ahead.
No, I completely agree with you. It's interesting. I worked for that publicly traded data analytics company starting in the 90s. We had a work from home policy then in 1998.
Wow.
And it was very forward thinking. You had to be a strong contributor within the organization. You had to be selected to go remote or to go home-based. And we reserved the right to call you back into the office if your performance suffered. And there was also a contract that you signed that clarified the working conditions within which you could work remotely. In other words, you couldn't care for your children and work at the same time for a full day. Now, maybe after school is different, but you had to have some type of care option for your kids during the majority of the workday. You had to have an ergonomic chair and a specific area set up with an office and a printer and, a telephone and those kinds of things. So, we were doing this back in the 90s, and it was very, very forward thinking at that time, very innovative at that time.
Sure.
And we didn't have the Zoom tools, the online virtual kinds of things. We barely had teleconferencing. Even cell phones were not prolific at that time. And so, no, I agree with you. If I come to the world of innovation from the world of being a corporate change agent. So organizational change has kind of been my specialty over the years of my corporate life. And it was a very easy transition into innovation because many of the skills, disciplines, or processes are very, very similar.
Well, I think design, you have to be open to change because that's what it is.
That's right.
Design is change.
It is
But
change.
on the other side of this, when it comes to running businesses, a lot of our clients find it very difficult to change what they're doing in order to have a better business. And it's not because they don't want to, it's just that it's a little bit scary to make the changes and learn some of the things they have to learn that they did not get in design school.
Yeah, most people that have 10 years of experience in doing whatever they're doing in the business world don't really have 10 years of experience. They have 1 year of experience 10 times, or they have 2 years of experience 5 times, and that's about it.
Yeah, yeah. It is, it's different. And so I guess I would ask you the question to follow, which is, how do you apply innovation if it's something that you've never really thought about before?
You know, great question. I think learning about what innovation is, maybe doing some rudimentary study on 1 or 2 of the different models or processes for innovation. See, innovation is a process. When we go and run an innovation sprint for a large multinational or a small business, we follow the same process. You know, we start by identifying the 1 or 2 business problems that they really need to solve, or the 1 or 2 opportunities that they really need to seize and move forward. And then we begin the process of quantifying those. So if it's a business problem, let's create a business problem statement. Let's be very clear that of the problem we're trying to solve. Let's do some quantitative validation, some credible facts and statistics to make sure that the problem is in fact a problem, number one, and that it's big enough to be worth the effort to solve it. Then we begin to do some more qualitative customer discovery validation, where we get out and talk to the people who experience the problem to the greatest degree, and we get feedback from them on that. And what we find is, once we do that quantitative and qualitative validation, we find that about 60% of our original assumptions were correct, but about 40% of them were incorrect. And we repivot our problem statement or opportunity statement. And so now we're pretty crystal clear. This is what we're trying to accomplish, and these will be the outcomes if we accomplish it. Then and only then do we actually move over into the design phase of designing solutions, because we now have a better understanding of what the problem or opportunity is. So many times in my past careers, I would see someone come up with a great idea. Oh, I've got a great idea. And then they would launch throngs of people behind that idea and tens of millions of dollars to try to bring that idea to fruition, only to figure out down the road and dollars and human expenditure of time later that it really wasn't a problem after all, or the way they articulated it was not a problem that could really be solved.
Interesting. Well, I think there's some merit to that, and certainly I think your process, I think it's great to know that it is a process that you follow, because then it means that it's something that everybody can use.
Everyone can use, can learn, and apply. Absolutely.
I love that. What do you think AI will do to the process of innovation?
You know, what I have found, and you know, we've talked about we use AI every day. You use it every day. I use it every day. Many times I'm using it and I don't know, but even more so, I'm using it and I know I'm specifically using, whether it's ChatGPT or some derivative of ChatGPT that's been trained on a particular niche of something. What I have found to the greatest degree is that ChatGPT and AI can really help someone move beyond the blank page syndrome of I don't really know where to get started. And every minute that one can spend learning about prompt engineering or prompt articulation, it really is garbage in, garbage out. And so understanding what it is that you're asking the AI to do, communicating to it the expert that you're needing it to be, and precisely the outcomes that you're looking in its response back to your prompt or your question, really overcomes this concept of I'm staring at a blank page and I don't even know where to start. My experience is things that I've known nothing about, where I've spent a little bit of time writing the prompt to get it to give me the right outputs. It gets me 75% of the way there with the very first iteration in 15 minutes. And oh, by the way, 14 and a half of those minutes are me architecting the right prompt. And 30 seconds is the AI actually giving me a response. It's just in terms of efficiency and return on the invested time from me, I think it's phenomenal.
I've been using it especially lately to take notes. And so I'll do it on Zoom. I'll set the AI for that. And I also use another product called Granola. So I'm able to use both of those differently and merge those together. And I've found those to be really helpful. So that's one of my tips for the day.
There's an AI tool out there right now that I've actually invested some money into called Oxygen, AUXIGEN. Aux standing for auxiliary, and Gen meaning generative AI. So it's what they've done basically is they've trained the language model on 20 of the top business frameworks that exist out there. And whether it's the Lean Canvas or it's the customer discovery or it's the a variety key performance indicators and several other. There are 20 tools out there that are based on some of the best business models and frameworks. And, I can spend 15 minutes putting my company in and some of our core products and services, the industry that we serve, who our ideal customers are, and then it will populate the rest of those business frameworks and provide them back to me in a model that can be edited. So in other words, recognizing that it may not get 100% of the way there with the first iteration, it may get 50, 75, or 80% of the way there. It's fully customizable by the entrepreneur. And it's been pretty phenomenal at watching these early stage entrepreneurs catapult themselves forward with Oxygen.ai.
I'm going to write that down.
Yep, AUXIGEN.ai.
All right. I'll be checking it out as soon as we get off this call today.
Very good.
All right. Well, on your website, you talk about innovation and leadership, and you say they're inseparable. And what do you mean by that?
Great question. I have observed over a number of years of doing this work that if I think I'm leading, and I think I'm doing a great job of leading, but I'm not innovating, I'm not challenging the status quo, I'm not constantly looking for better ways to do things, I'm not going to be leading for long because someone will come and do a better job of what I'm doing than what I'm doing. By the same token, if I think I'm doing a good job at innovation, but I'm really not a great leader, innovation requires change. Change involves people. People have emotions and loyalties and habits. And so if I'm not a great leader, then the likelihood that I'm going to get people to adopt my innovations and for those innovations to actually stick, it's not very great. And so this concept of I have to innovate to consistently be a good leader, and I have to lead to be a consistently good innovator. And that's why I've kind of articulated the sentiment that leadership and innovation are inseparable. I truly believe they are.
That makes sense. I like the concept behind that. Now, I've been reading your book, and it's called Top Performers Field Guide, Catalyst for Leaders, Superstars, and All Who Want to Be or Aspire to Be. And I would love for you to pick out maybe 4 or 5 different key messages in there that you'd like to share from the book.
Sure. And by the way, there are 2 that are very similar. One's called the Top Performers Field Guide, and one's called the Innovators Field Guide. They're written very, very similarly in terms of short snippets of tangible information that's usually told in the form of an illustration, followed by 3 or 4 thought-provoking questions that guide you individually to the outcomes that particular passage might be driving you toward. So early in my career, one of the outcomes of the Top Performers Field Guide, and one of the reasons that I labeled it such, is early in my career as a professor at the University of Arkansas for medical sciences, I was studying top performers. What is the difference between top 1% of performers and the middle 50% of performers. So middle 50% of performers are not unsuccessful people. They're successful people. In fact, they're the vast majority of the workforce. But what is it that differentiates those top performers from those middle performers? And ultimately came down to this concept of sustained success, either individually or as a leader, really revolves around my ability to balance results and relationships. If I focus on results at the expense of relationships, I'll be wildly successful very, very quickly. That is until I alienate everyone around me who's responsible for helping me create and maintain those results, and then I lose them both. But by the same token, if I focus on relationships at the expense of results, people will love me for a period of time until they lose respect for me because I can't deliver that which I need and am expected to deliver on a consistent basis. And so results and relationships are the difference in sustained success. Now, under each of those, there are a number of behaviors, knowledge, skills, abilities, and habits that enable me to generate sustained results or to create long-lasting relationships. And so it goes a little deeper than that. But at the high level, results and relationships are the tightrope that we must walk on a day-to-day basis in order to consistently perform at a high level. The next one I would say is, and I mentioned this one earlier, failure's only failure if you quit. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it's just feedback. And every failure, if viewed not as a failure, but as a temporary setback that is giving us valuable feedback that we can use to adjust our approach in order to produce greater success in round 2 or round 3 or round 4, then there really is no such thing as failure. Right? So that would be probably number 2.
I like that. I think it's very interesting that you say that, because I think about all of the pivots that we've made in our business, and pivot is a word that's a little overused these days. But I think that just the reality is we cannot pivot. We can't really innovate and solve problems unless we have a problem, right?
That's
we
right.
have to have something to work from. And usually it's not, we're not trying to fix something that's going well. We're usually trying to fix something that's broken.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that probably leads me to number 3.
Okay.
In that the only thing required for innovation to occur is a constraint. Mm-hmm. So think about that.
Perfect. Yeah.
If we have no constraint, there's no need to innovate. We just keep doing the same thing we've been doing forever. But generally, some type of constraint enters the picture. Either the market changes, the competitive landscape changes, the economics of our business change. Maybe we lose 2 top employees. And so those constraints get forced upon us, and we have to think about better ways of doing things. And that is the definition, plan change, that guides us toward better ways of doing things. That is in fact, the definition of innovation. So
I think those are some great tips. I'm just fascinated by it. And I've read about the theory of constraints, and I find that to be really interesting. And there's a book, I don't know if you've read it. It was probably 2014 when I read it. I can even remember. I think it was August. And it was The Obstacle is the Way. And if you haven't read that book, it's a very nice book written by somebody who is a Stoic, really.
Okay.
And it really made me rethink my business, and it made me rethink. And at that time, we came out with a different brand. We literally shifted and switched what we were doing, and we rebranded our company as a result of reading that.
Interesting. Very good. Very good.
That's a good book for everybody to read, which brings me to another thing, which is a book that you've read and I've read and I love, and it's Patrick Lencioni's The Advantage. So tell me why you like that so much.
You know, the book, The Advantage, everything about the book screams 3 things. And they're the 3 things that my entire practice has been developed around even before I read Lencioni's The Advantage. And so it was really validating to me to read that book. And it also fine-tuned some of the more rugged and rudimentary thoughts that I'd had on the subject previously. But the 3 things that the book screams around my entire practice is built is, number 1, cohesive leadership. That's a very clear element of his book, The Advantage. clarity, 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 clarity. So creating clarity, over communicating clarity, reinforcing clarity. So he talks about that over and over. So leadership, what I call mine's strong leadership, clarity and focus, which is one of mine, which he talks on. And then the other one is culture. And, a lot of CEOs and senior executives in the 80s, 90s, prior to probably the mid-2000s, really saw culture as something HR did and saw it as kind of fluff. It's kind of a necessary evil. We got to talk about it, but we don't really believe in it. And I have spent a career watching organizations, researching in organizations, leading organizations all around the world. And I've observed that organizations that truly innovate, that truly achieve this track record of sustained strategic growth have cultivated within their organization a culture of excellence. And a lot of people think that culture is just the core values that we put on the wall. And that's the way we articulate kind of our desired culture a lot of times. But culture is really everything. It is those core values. It is the shared norms, unwritten behaviors and norms in the organization that no one really talks about. It's the degree to which we're process-oriented or non-process-oriented. It's the feeling I have on a Sunday night when I'm getting ready to go to work on Monday morning. And it's the feeling I have on a Friday afternoon when I'm in my car leaving the business. All of those things point toward the concept of what the culture is. And we may have this thing we call the espoused culture, the culture we say we have, but the culture in use is never identical. Sometimes it's close, but at various times throughout the year or 2-year period or what have you, it kind of ebbs and flows. The culture we say we have versus the culture we actually have kind of ebb and flow. And so I've observed organizations that are very clear on what is the culture they're trying to create. They articulate those in a set of clearly defined core values and other cultural documentation. And they use those core values and other cultural elements and behavioral standards and what have you to recruit and select new employees, to onboard and train those new employees, to promote leaders from the population of people who embody that culture, and who fire people who are blatantly violating the desired culture. Those are the organizations that have truly created a culture of excellence. And there are 5 or 6 actually 6 elements that we begin to observe when we're working with clients about that culture of excellence. And so I think that's why I like Lencioni's book so much, is because it really screams culture of excellence to me.
Mm-hmm. It's a great book. I enjoy all of his books. We spend a lot of time talking about the 5 dysfunctions of a team. And we've worked with a number of our clients on that. We've talked about it extensively because I think it's very important. In culture, you're right, it's everything. If you don't have it, or if it's not a strong culture, or if it's toxic, then your company cannot be efficient. There's just no way.
So strong culture, strong positive cultures, through multiple research studies, have been associated with increased revenue growth to the tune of about 400%. Greater degrees of profitability, greater degrees of employee performance, productivity, and satisfaction, less turnover. Negative, weak cultures have been associated with greater turnover rates, greater degrees of disengaged employees. That's employees who quit and leave versus employees who quit and stay versus employees who quit and leave. More accidents, more errors, et cetera. So the research is very clear about the importance of culture. It is a business discipline, just like finance, just like operations, where early in my career, I would have said that the pervasive belief across companies would be that culture is just kind of something that's just fluffy, and it's relegated to the HR department.
Mm-hmm. I hear you. Well, and I appreciate that you're sharing that. And I think all of our listeners, if you want to read a book that's great about culture, I think The Advantage is a great one to read.
Sure.
Well, let's talk a little bit about who or what inspires you.
I was asked this question a few weeks ago on a podcast out of the UK, I believe, and I'm inspired a lot by a lot of people, but I have to say my mother's probably one of my most inspiring figures. She will be 80 in November. She still works. She still works 2 jobs, quite frankly.
Wow.
Not because she has to, but because she's a travel club coordinator for a local community bank. So she takes groups of people on trips all over the country and all over the world, for that matter, and still works 3 days a week as kind of a business development officer to that group of golden travelees, kind of, so to speak. And she's a realtor, a part-time realtor, and a grandmother, great grandmother, et cetera. Her work ethic is impeccable. But she's decided she wants to retire in a couple of years. So anyway, but I would say that. And I would also say definitely the women in my life, my wife, my daughters, all 3 are nurses and or nurse practitioners.
Wow.
My older daughter who has 2 grandbabies, grandbabies of mine, 2 daughters. One's 3 months old, one's 2 years old. Works as a neonatal nurse practitioner, and she's a Wonder Woman, just a Wonder Woman. And
well, not surprising.
Yep.
Comes from a good tree.
Well.
So in 10 years, what will you have contributed or accomplished, and who will you be?
So I went through a crisis of calling back several years ago when I was an executive for this publicly traded company. And I asked myself the question, I was going to work every day. I had about 500 people in the organization that I led across 5 continents. And I said, I'm pretty sure that my creator didn't create or call me to sell data to marketers trying to better target their consumers. But that's how I earn my living every day. And so what is my calling? At that time, I was teaching an adult Sunday school class that I'd taught for 15 or 18 years at that time. I was speaking occasionally around the state and the chamber world and what have you on leadership and team development and what have you. And I'd been a professor at the medical school, so I'd gotten some feedback on my teaching then. And pretty sure I wasn't called to sell data to marketers, but that's what I was doing. And so I had someone who was in one of my classes one time. She said, "Jeff, you're a revealer." And I said, I don't understand what that means. And she said, "It doesn't matter if I'm sitting in your Sunday school class or I'm listening to you speak down at the chamber on leadership, or Mark and I are out with you and Lori for dinner. You say things that provoke me to think differently about my home, my life, my work, and how I approach those." So that kind of stuck in my mind, and I started exploring where I was getting energy, where I was going home at the end of the day fulfilled and energized versus the kinds of things I was doing when I would go home and feel less than fulfilled and energized. And I started realizing that sitting across the table from people that worked in my organization or that worked across the enterprise in other organizations in the company, when I was sitting across the table from them, helping them solve challenges that could have been work-related, or we were talking about parenting advice or personal financial advice or career advice, or I was speaking at the chamber, what have you. Those were the kinds of things where I was getting much more fulfilled. And so I came to the belief that everyone has a calling. For some people, their vocation is their calling. In other words, they earn their living by fulfilling their calling, like my neonatal nurse practitioner daughter, or my pediatric oncology nurse daughter, or my physician son-in-law, or my pastor father-in-law, or whomever. They earn their living by fulfilling their calling. The other half of the world, their vocation supports their calling if they can figure out the connection between the two. And I realized that job gave me a great platform to fulfill my calling. And I've come to terms with the belief that my calling, that I've been specifically gifted to create new insights that inspire people to better ways of living and working.
Oh, love that.
And so when I figured out the connection between that calling and what I did every day to earn my living, I went to work with a completely different attitude, a completely different perspective. And So that was a long answer to a short question. In 10 years, what will you have become? 8 years ago, on my 50th birthday, I left that company to do what I do today. And I believe I made the shift from my vocation supporting my calling to my vocation being my calling in doing so. And so I think I'm there, and I intend to continue doing that. I said spent the first half of my life making a living. I want to spend the second half making more of a difference.
Love that. Well, that's great. And I feel like actually I was 52 when I started this business, and people can do the math. I'm not young. Yeah. So it was really good for me because this is my calling. And exactly. I agree with you, because all the other stuff leading up to it was not my calling. And That's so right. I didn't have the passion that I do for this. So I really think that was very beautifully said. All right. So we always end with 3 takeaways that you would like people to use once they leave this podcast.
Yep. And I'm going to just review a couple of things that we've already talked about. The first one would be just revisit that statement on calling. And I encourage everyone, if you haven't connected with what your calling is, spend some time doing that. Reach out to me, and I'll share my contact information in a moment. I'd be glad to provide you with a little exercise to talk you through that. But figure out what your calling is, and then look for the connection between your vocation and your calling. That's number one. Number 2, if you're experiencing failure, you're experiencing temporary setbacks, you don't seem to just be getting where you think you ought to be getting, start examining the feedback that's coming with those temporary setbacks and failures. What's it trying to tell you about your approach? What's it trying to tell you about your business? What's it trying to tell you about your leadership? What's it trying to tell you about your grit or lack thereof? And use that information to adapt your style and your approach. And the last thing that I would say is, and I don't know if I said this earlier, but I'll end with it. Top performers invariably have a future orientation. In other words, they look out 3 years, 4 years, and 5 years down the road, and they get crystal clear on what that 5 years, what it's going to look like in 3 or 4 or 5 years. And they put a date to it. So 12/31/2029 or 2028 or what have you. I am, I will, I have, I do, right? So they get very, very clear on what their life, their business, their job is going to look like in that, say, 5-year period. And then they relentlessly work toward bringing that about. And so top performers have a future orientation. So if you don't know where your life is going, architect it and start moving that direction.
Oh my gosh, that is so perfect. I just did another podcast recording with someone, and he was talking about having a strategy session with himself 17 years ago. And he has done all of those things that he envisioned 17 years ago. And I loved the way that he went about it. And he said, I guess it's time for another strategy session with myself.
Sure.
And so thank you for sharing that. I think that was beautifully said.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. And we look forward to sharing this. And everyone, be sure and check out Jeff's book, Top Performers Field Guide or Innovators Field Guide. You've got both of those. And they're on Amazon, and a very good book. So thank you for sharing your expertise today, and also wonderful books.
Thank you. And folks can reach out to me directly. I'm very active on LinkedIn, and it's Jeff Standridge on LinkedIn. Jeff S, as in Standridge, Jeff S at innovationjunkie.com or jeffstandridge.com. Be happy to connect with any of your listeners.
And we'll put that in the show notes too.
Fantastic.
All right.
Gail, thank you so much.
It's my pleasure.
Thanks, Jeff, for sharing your expertise this week on the podcast. We hope after listening to this episode, you're feeling inspired to improve a system within your business, whether it's something big or just a small improvement. Apply now for Business Breakthrough Live. Join us in Denver on November 10th and 11th for actionable training that will help you grow your business. Visit thepearlcollective.com/BBL to learn more about this business-changing experience.